I was so happy and proud of you when I heard that you passed the CFA, especially without an accounting background. I was overwhelmed with pride. To me, this is a powerful reminder that determination and discipline can overcome any limitation. Siyambulela ke uNkulunkulu ngempumelelo yakho Diba. Tinga, Tinga, even the sky is not the limit.
For those of you meeting me for the first time, my name is Yonelisa and I am a CFA charter holder. I hold an undergraduate degree from Wits University. It's a civil engineering degree. And I am from a small village called Tomo from the Eastern Cape. That's where my mom is actually from. And then my dad is from a village in Port St. John's. I grew up in Tata and in 2015 then moved to Johannesburg in the city of gold. So one interesting thing about me that you don't know is that I'm curious and I'm reflective and certainly still learning. The crux of the matter here is to actually understand what the charters table is and where the whole story came from. And you'll be interested to know that the charters table came from a lunch with friends. Actually, once I had completed the CFA charter in 2024. I then had like a mini celebration, and then I moved on to the next thing, so which was my second qualification, which was the CIPM. And then I never really got to celebrate. And then until one day, one of a few of my friends actually said to me, "No, Yonelisa, you need to celebrate. You need to do something." Then eventually I caved in a year later on the anniversary of my CFA charter designation, which was the 1st of November 2025. Then I hosted a lunch, and the lunch was called the Charters Table. And it was at this table where my friends came together. So these are some of my friends from my first job and a few friends that I'd made in Joburg over time. So we came together and everybody sat around the table and everybody spoke about the impact of my CFA journey on them and what they had taken from them. And then one of my friends actually saw my post about this, and he then said to me, "This should be more than a one time occasion. It needs to be a bigger conversation." So it was that conversation and that lunch that actually sparked this charters table movement, and it's since then become a movement and a conversation where a few other people have asked to join the table because they see themselves reflected and they feel like they belong in this table. The belonging is very important, and it's important in the sense that when I was doing my CFA charter, for example, is I felt alone and I spent a lot of time alone. So I moved to Joburg, to Cape Town in 2020 during COVID time, and you can imagine what was happening to the world at that time. So I'm having to spend time studying while adjusting to a new city, while also trying to make friends and all those things. So I spend a lot of time alone. For example, the CFA designation, they say that the average candidate spends around about approximately 300 hours studying per exam. And I am not the average candidate. I spent 2 to 3 times that. So which means I spent between 600 hours to 900 hours per exam. There's a lot of people that actually go through the same journey who feel alone during this time, and we just wanted to create that platform for people to have a place of belonging. And also maybe, and this is an important one, this part is the part where I genuinely feel as if it's what makes us actually fall back and maybe fail or come short in our journey. So I'll tell you the story. So when I went through the CFA journey, when I initially said I'm going to start studying, I knew a lot of candidates. So people were like maybe a level 1 candidate or maybe level 2. I didn't really know level 3 candidates at the time. And then so that was for a long time the people that I knew. So I didn't really know any charter holders. And eventually on LinkedIn, you connect with people because you see the designation that you want, but you don't really know how they got to that designation. And you might try to reach out, but maybe they're not accessible at that point in time because of work commitments and other things. And I then so that was my experience of it. Yes, sure, I had my colleagues, some of my colleagues who had charters, but we come from different backgrounds and have different experiences. So I can't always relate to them to that effect and to that extent. And mind you, I come from a different background completely because of my undergrad and my exposure in science. So already our point of departure is different. So that was my experience. And then as I went through the CFA charter, I started getting to know people and all those things, and started getting exposure to other charter holders. But what I'm trying to get to is that if you don't have the exposure and the people to speak to about these things and the stories that you can relate to, it makes it really difficult for you to see yourself reflected and to see yourself and to feel yourself as if you belong. And this is something that you can achieve because people are not accessible. They will say the way you would think they should be accessible. So that's why we have this platform, is to bring the stories to you, to create the stories, and to give you that access to the stories that could affect and help you in your own journey in your own way. So effectively, I'm trying to create the table that I wish I had. I think I'm actually registered with the wrong society, and I'll tell you why. I think I should have been with SAICA, which is the accounting one, not the CFA Institute. So when I was growing up, again, there's a lot of stories from my childhood because I think those were very formative years, so they say. But when I was in grade 7, I wanted to be a chartered accountant, and everybody at my mom's church knew this. And I think I think the influence came from the fact that there was a lot of accountants at the time. So some people were trying to become accountants. So my mom was one of them, and her friends. So I used to see them quite a lot studying, and I thought, oh, this is a path I could follow. And so then I wanted to be a CA. All hell broke loose actually in grade 9. So when we were taken to a science fair, I was in the first two classes, which is A and B. So then they took us to a science fair. It was that fair that confused me because I saw what they could do with water and how they created electricity from water, and I was certain that I wanted to be an engineer afterwards. So that's how I ended up choosing engineering. So I could have done electrical engineering, but I think the influence of my brother and my sister. So my sister is in quantity surveying, and then my brother is in civil engineering. So then that influence actually influenced me to end up choosing civil engineering. But now going back to this, when I was choosing to move from being a CA to an engineer, my mom, again, she tried, Shem, poor soul, she tried to convince me to to stick with accounting and with the original path that I wanted to do. And then she even called my cousin who came after work, the CA cousin, who came after work to come convince me. Even he did not win. So what we eventually did was, I was like, okay, no, I'm gonna go down this path of engineering, and my family allowed me to do it. And then that was all good and well. So I'd won that round. And then, the way life works. The way life works is I get to now grade 10. I have my chosen path. I'm doing my maths and science. My school was going through a transition at that time. And during that transition, a few teachers that had been with the school for a very long time actually left the school. So now we had a new teacher that came in. And our physics teacher was a new person in the school, and he actually did not command the respect of students. You know how students can be, high school kids. They can be. So if they size you up and they feel as if you're not worthy of their respect, then they're not going to respect you. So that's what happened to my teacher. So he spent a lot of time trying to calm the class down as opposed to teaching the class. So we spent half of the time doing that eventually. And then that actually filtered through into our marks, actually, because we're not being taught as much as we should have been. And I'm sad to tell you that my marks were just tanking, moving from, I don't remember where it started, but I moved down towards, at the end of grade 10, I had a 30% in physical sciences. Now, if you've ever gotten a mark called a 30 or 60 or whatever, especially like the big milestones, so maybe a 30 or an 80, just know that you probably, the odds of you having had a round mark like that are very low. You've probably been rounded up. So in my case, I think I was rounded up so that I did not have a 28 or 29, which is a fail by high school standards. So I had this 30% and I was ready to drop physics. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna become an engineer after this. I want to become a CA. So you can imagine now I have to go home and go tell my mother and my family that, look, this engineering thing is not gonna work for me. I want to be the CA that you guys wanted me to be. And it's the shame, it's the disappointment that I'm feeling. And I feel like I've lost this round now. So I go home, I could tell them this, everyone's fine. I get what I want. So they were like, that's what you want to do, you will do it. And then I went to grade 11. We had a new teacher now, Miss Labanelo, and there was a few of us who actually wanted to drop the subject physics. And Mem Klabanelo is supposed to sign off our slips that says that we can indeed change physics. So I was going to go do accounting and become a chartered accountant. And then Mem Klabanelo was like, I'm not signing any one slip. You guys are going to study. You guys are going to sit and you're going to open a book and you're going to study. So it was that resolve that actually instilled in me. I sat and I was like, I am going to do this and I'm going to study. And I think my marks started improving. So I moved from the 30, and then I think the first term I was at 40, and then second term I moved to what was I? 50 something, and then eventually I think I ended in the early 60s at the end of grade 11. So my marks are now starting to move from like this, and then we started going up like that. And then, so we are cruising. So when we got to grade 12, obviously there's momentum now. I've got a pace, I'm going at a speed. And I'm happy to say that I eventually got a distinction in physics. So at the end of grade 12, it was only at the end of grade 12. So I had been working towards it. And then end of grade 12, got this distinction. You eventually got to university and got a text saying, hey, welcome to Wits. Yay, I'm going to do engineering at Wits now, civil engineering to be exact, at Wits. And I get there, I'm obviously amped up and I'm happy. I feel like I'm on top of the world. And when you get to Wits, if you've ever been to Wits or to university, you will learn a few things very quickly. So I actually learned very quickly that I might have been one of the top students in my class in my grade at my high school, but now I was amongst the top students in the country. So which means in that class, I was at the bottom. So I'll explain a few things to you. So you get there's guys who had 100% in maths and 100% in physics, and they're in my class. And then they've got a bursary, or they're part of the dean's list, and they've got all these nice accolades behind them. Some of them even did 8 subjects or 9 subjects. Like the standard is 7. Like, why are you going to do 2 extra subjects? Like, make it make sense. And I was already struggling with the ones that were given to me. And then now you want to go add a few other courses. So that was firstly the first humbling moment for me when I got to university. It was just looking around and then feeling I had a moment of inadequacy, if I may say, when I looked around. But that didn't last long, because university is the great equalizer for everybody. So I think once we wrote our first tests, which was in March-ish, would have been around March, our scores came back. People failed and I had passed. What happened there? So, and then afterwards, obviously that then created something. People started, coming to consult me, and it was quite nice. So the 100% students, I remember one of them. I used to study with him because we ended up staying in the same building, so we spoke a lot. But I think what had happened there is, remember, I failed physics. Well, fail in inverted commas. Remember, I failed physics in high school. I got that 30%, and then I moved from and then to that. Yes. So that for me was the training ground. It didn't happen in varsity. That training ground for me happened in high school. So the whole essence of varsity is you learn it's self study, it's independent study, and everything is all dependent on you. I learned how to do that in university, in high school. I didn't have the guardrails. Yes, my teachers were there, but it wasn't to the same effect that other people, I believe, had. There's nothing wrong with guardrails, but you sometimes don't learn how to be independent, and I learned that, and that's the same attitude that I took into my studies when I got to university. So that for me was a very key and a defining moment in my university career. So now that's great. Whenever you have great moments like these, and you will feel, like you're walking on water, you're walking on air, you're untouchable because you have everything figured out. But life does not work like that, unfortunately. So mechanics, it was a good subject for me. It was one of my strong points, and because it was physics. So mechanics is part of the physical sciences subject, and they break it up when you get to varsity, it was chemistry, we had physics, and then we had dynamics. Then we also had I can't remember, but physics was broken up into those different parts. So that's what happened. And then, yeah, I saw mechanics. I'm excelling. I'm tutoring my classmates. The tutors know me as a guy who's going to ace this thing. I get to the exam in June and I blank out. The expectations of everybody were just too heavy on me. And I remember I sat there for a while because it was a 3-hour exam. And I remember sitting there and I felt like, no, man, I don't know what I'm doing. Can I even perform? Can I even do this? So I actually had performance anxiety. That's what you call it. That's just performance anxiety. And then I panicked. And then eventually I came back and then I wrote and I started writing. But then I ran out of time. To cut a long story short, I failed that exam. But I passed the course. But my mark was terrible. It was in the 50s. So this is somebody who was supposed to get a distinction, and then I get a 50. So that was a very sad one. And what was even worse is when people then came to me to say, yeah, I'm sure that was an easy exam. I'm sure you did well in that exam. I will never forget the pain I felt when I went through that. So I think for me, the lesson there is that the weight of others' expectations is a heavy weight to bear. That was a big lesson. So I took that with me whenever, like, as I journeyed throughout university thereafter. So now there's another spectacular failure I need to tell you about. So this one was an actual failure because mechanics, I still passed it, but I got to third year eventually, and there's a course called structures. So if you know anyone who's ever did civil engineering, speak to them, ask them what was their hardest course. There's 2 of them, they'll probably tell you, or 3 if you're speaking to a VITSI. But it's structures and it's hydraulics. And then if you're a VITSI, during my time, it was environmental engineering. Yes, ESG is hard. So so those are the 3 courses. But structures for me was a special case in that I was defeated before I even started the course. So you walk into this class, it's one of the biggest classes I had been to, and you look around, you see people that have been repeating the course for 3-4 times, and a lot of people, the average was 3 times actually. So I'm thinking, who do I think I am to pass this thing first time? And then you speak to people, they make you realize that, no, man, like, it's impossible to pass this thing. So I get defeated before I even start. And yeah, so that, I think that was it. I even got a sub. I always say I got the wrong sub because if I had gotten hydraulics or whatever, I would have passed that. But because it was structures, this one was just too much. So chances are you never pass this particular sub. That was the crux of it. But I think for me, that failure was quite important because it gave me an extra year in university. And what that year did for me is the year that effectively transformed my entire life and changed the trajectory of my career and my life. Because it was that year when I went to vacation work and I spoke to an engineer on site who told me about his friends who had gone into finance from engineering, and they told me about graduate programs that the banks and some of the consulting firms actually offer. And for me, that was all the information I needed to intrigue me to research more and figure out this journey of going into finance from engineering without having to study a new degree. I actually learned that not all closed doors are locked doors. Sometimes you need to hold the handle, try the handle, and see. You might be surprised what's on the other side of the door. So not many people have the master to try. Maybe be the person that just tries a bit harder. You never know what you could find on the other side. So now, if eventually I joined the graduate program, it's great. I'm playing catch up now because I missed out on it was 2 weeks, I think, of the graduate program or so, something like that. And I worked. I made sure I worked, and uh, needless to say that I was one of the top grads in that graduate program. I was number 6 actually out of in the top 10 of the graduate program toward in the end of the graduate program. So it was just to show how much I really wanted to be there, and I was happy to be there, and I still am happy to be here. So that was just a side note. But when I was in the graduate program, I think the one thing that had happened was that we got placed in the different departments. And I think the shortcoming of our program at the time was that we didn't get rotated around. So you effectively found yourself in a team, and the chances of any young person in their first job actually enjoying and doing that job for the rest of their lives is very small. And HR knows this. I've told them a lot of times, something I advocate for. I'm saying young people need to be rotated in the graduate program. So that was something that I communicated openly. And for me, this then means that I did not, I wasn't necessarily aligned in terms of the skill set and the interests when in the role that I was placed in. So what I then did was I sort of started figuring out, how do I then pivot into something that's more aligned with my skill set and something I like. And now, so this is where now conversations with my teammates and people around me actually started to matter and helped me quite a bit, because the work I was doing at the time then gave me exposure to some things, and I started asking the questions. So I'm like, how does this work? Why is that there? We're looking after unit trusts at the time, but it was from a compliance side. So I was like, okay, but how did they decide this? And I think then a conversation with my colleague, because then he explained to me everything, and I was like, oh, that's something I want to do. And upon further research, I realized that that's something I really want to do. So remember that phone story I told you about when I saved money to buy a phone? So imagine had I had that knowledge then and then invested the money. So now I'm now asking a question about the very thing to say, so how did then they decide that? So then I wanted to become that so that I can, yeah. So it felt for me, it felt as if the journey was starting to come together and make sense, and it started to feel like a calling. But then the question is, how do I get there? Because I don't have a finance degree. I don't have the experience that the roles that I was looking at require for me in order to become an analyst, because that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to become an analyst. And I then had to figure it out. I was like, okay, I'm going to apply for jobs. I don't qualify, but I'm going to apply for that job. And I also found out about CFA at the same time, and I registered for it. And we'll get to that story shortly. But needless to say is that my applying for those jobs was me taking a leap of faith. Again, this is another leap of faith I took to say I want to move to that part of of finance, which is finance best kept secret. And there's a recruiter who then eventually saw my CV, and she looked at it and she thought to herself, you could do this job. And then I remember looking at the post, and I was like, no, but I don't have experience, because it wanted somebody with 5 years experience. I've got 2, and even that, it's not even related to what they want. But I still said, and I consulted a few people, and they were like, no, try it. And then I was like, oh, okay, let's do it. And I went to the interview. I connected with what was the founder, and then had a whole chat with the CFO, with the CEO at the time. And yeah, and then that's how I got into investment management. That's how I made the pivot from the graduate program into investment management. It was just me taking another bet on myself yet again. So now going back to the CFA story. So I spoke to one of my friends at the time, and he had told me that he tried CFA, but it it was too hard. So he wrote it, he failed the exam, he had taken time off, and but he encouraged me still to do it. And if you've ever looked at the pass rate for this exam, you will quickly realize that, geez, the odds are very low for people to get through this program. And mind you, these odds are for people that have studied finance. This is people with masters, this is people with years of experience. And then there I am saying I want to go down this journey. And I registered anyways, because if I look at the odds were against me, but I don't care about odds. I do what I need to do, and I go after what I want. And then so yeah, so then I did that and moved down to Cape Town, because me moving down to Cape Town was a teenage dream of mine. So yay, got that. And even here's an important part, because this all happened way before COVID. So I registered for CFA in September 2019, with the intent to write in June 2020. We all know what happened in March 2020. We went in a global lockdown we thought it was only 21 days. And then, Cyril was like, no, we'll extend it and extend it. And then eventually we got an email telling us, no, our exam has been postponed, which for me, I realize now that was a blessing in disguise, in that I had done a mock exam, which is a past paper thing, sort of to say, and I failed. And I was like, geez, I don't know how I would have done in the exam. So I then had to change my strategy, because it doesn't it wasn't working clearly. So the one thing about CFA, has got a lot of volume, and that volume is what actually kills a lot of us, because imagine in university you've got 10 subjects for the year. Yes. So all those 10 subjects, you write them in one exam. And if you don't have a good study plan, you are gonna not do well. You're not gonna do well at that point in time. So that's what makes it hard. It's the volume. So the CFA charter itself, I would say it's not the hardest exam I've ever written in my life, but I think it's just the things around it that make it very, very hard. So anyways, eventually, so I postponed my exam. I was meant to write in December 2020, but I just moved to Cape Town. So I opted not to write then. And I also wanted to enjoy the city, because, it's Cape Town. And then I registered to write in May 2021. Yeah, May 2021 is the day I decided, okay, I'm going to do this thing now. So from September 2019 to May 2021, at this point, I'm just tired of this thing. I just want to see and go right and get it over and done with, because it's been coming, and it is causing me a lot of anxiety. So I studied, I went to go write the exam, I finished, and I waited for my results. When results came out, I remember getting an email 2 hours earlier than what I was expecting, because it was supposed to come out at 3 p.m. South African time, and they came out around about 1 o'clock for me, at least my email. I remember the email read, "Congratulations, you have passed your CFA Level 1 exam." And I erupted in joy. And I was working from home that day. I'm sure my neighbors must have wondered what is going on to this person. And I remember I called my mom, I called my friends, and I also even called my boss. It's my boss then who then said to me, "Did you see the pass rate on this thing?" So I hadn't paid attention to it, because for me the important part was just seeing the pass next to my name, and that was it. And I passed this thing the first time around, so I didn't fail it. So I was quite pleased by that outcome. And then the pass rate was 26%. And it was the lowest it had ever been in the history of this exam. This exam started in 1963. And that's the exam I passed. So 26,000 of us globally wrote the exam. And so 6,000 of us actually passed globally. So that was, a massive feat. So I was quite pleased by it. But guess what happened? Quickly, I started feeling very insecure, and I felt like, what if I'm a one-hit wonder? Like, you know those artists, person releases one big song and then afterwards every other song that comes is not as great. So that was my thinking. Also, I'm thinking because now there's these expectations of me again of, yeah, Yone is gonna finish CFA in record time, and I just couldn't. That was just too heavy for me to carry. So I actually had to let go of of those expectations quite quickly. And but I think the one thing that did happen for me was during that time is I got introduced to another course, which is CIPM, which is the second designation that I have. And I was told, okay, no, maybe register for this before you write CFA level 2. So now I'm doing two courses, two designations at the same time, as opposed to one. So in March 2022, yes, March 2022, I registered to write, and I was going to write then in March 2022 this exam, which is CIPM level 1, then with the intent to write CFA level 2 in August 2022. That's very ambitious now that I think of it now. But anyways, I thought I was going to juggle both, 1 hour here, 2 hours there, and then I'll do it. But then I quickly realized that the CIPM exam is just as demanding. So I gave that time. And then once I wrote it, took a break, and then started studying for CFA level 2. Just before the exam, a month before, I think, I remember it was a month before the exam. I've never experienced burnout in my life before, but I did with this particular one. I remember I'd study, nothing would go into my head, nothing at all. And I made stupid mistakes. I was struggling with sleep. I was just not in a good space. So I go write the exam, and then I write the exam. I make mistakes again in that exam. I remember the last few questions, probably derivatives. I remember I quickly like, because it's a multiple choice. So I quickly like typed A, B, C, A, randomly. Like it was 5 or 6 questions that I had, and a few other questions that I did that too. Obviously, the chances of me passing those particular questions was very low because now it's a random thing that I've selected. I haven't applied my mind to it. So then I remember someone asking me, so how do you think you did? I'm like, no, I probably failed. And if I did pass, it's going to be a marginal pass. So the results come back. I was in a meeting when I got these results, and so I went to radio silence, and I saw the email coming in, and indeed it had happened. I had failed, but it's fine. I quickly accepted it because this was not my first failure in life. So this was very important for me that because I've learned how to deal with failure before, it didn't feel as such a grand thing that it now was a reflection of my capabilities or what I could do. And because also I knew beforehand that, look, I already messed up that exam. So I'm fine with the outcome. And when I got the results, actually, they did reflect somebody who knew something. I just fell short of a few marks. And then, so those marks that I quickly randomly selected, those were the ones that actually hurt me. So I then prepared for, I then decided to sit again in May, August 2023 now? Yes, August 2023. I was going to sit and rewrite. And one of the things that led me to burning out the first time around, I stopped exercising because I thought I was saving time. That's very funny now. I started seeing my friends. So I started doing other things outside school. And because of those other things I did outside, they were very good for my mental health. So which means when I went to go sit and study, I was in a good space. My cup was refilled, and I felt like my life was fulfilled. So it was a balancing act that I sort of had to figure out. And I also had a better attitude towards school and towards, I think, work and all those things. So everything just sort of aligned for me when I did level 2 the second time. And then, and then got the results, passed it, obviously. It was just one of those things where it's not obvious because level 2 is the hard. If you speak to people, level 2 is the hardest exam, which I actually disagree with, but I'll tell you now why. So I passed level 2, which is great, and because it would have been devastating, I must say, this time around had I failed it. So then eventually went to level 3, and level 3 for me was an interesting one because there's a lot of people that I know that failed level 3. So people would have sailed through 1, 2. Then when they got to 3, that's where they got held up, and some of them even dropped out of the course at this point in time. So remember how what I said earlier on about, I think 3 is the hardest one, not necessarily 2. 2 is very technical, but 3 is, that's where you need to think like a portfolio manager. You need to think like an allocator. You need to think like you there's a lot of application that you have to do at that point in time. You're not necessarily thinking like an analyst or learning the fundamental tools of this thing. So now you're going into the crux of it. So that's where I think it becomes a bit tricky. So I then applied that mentality that I needed to give myself enough time to prepare for this thing. So I'd spoken to one of my colleagues who told me, give yourself enough time. So I was meant to write in February 2025, and then I decided, no, I'll write in August, so that I can have this time to prepare for this thing. So that was sage advice from my colleague there. And also I was not in a rush because now I'm almost there. I can see the peak, so I can climb it. I can take my time to climb and enjoy the view one more time, because the view is quite nice. And I think one more thing before I continue. So for me, the CFA program is also about who you become in the process. It's not only just about the content that you're consuming. It's also the person you become. So you become a person who's able to learn new things, become a person who can think on their own and who can handle stress, who can handle a full-time job whilst juggling, very demanding qualification, which people have called the gold standard of investment management. So that's the person you become in the process, that I feel is what you should take from the journey, more than wanting to get the designation itself. So yes, so now I've studied, I've prepared for the last exam. I even took 3 weeks of leave from work. So if this thing goes south for me, I don't have any leave. So I had taken a loan so that I could get extra lessons, all these things. But it was just to prepare myself and ensure that when I go into the battle, I'm battle ready. So that was just the one thing, is that I did not want to go there disarmed. I wanted to be ready for every question, everything. So I write this exam, and it's flowing. In the second paper, I remember there's a question. There's the first question. It's in fixed income. Hey, that question, I looked at it. I'm like, no, I can't do this. There's something was missing. I couldn't figure out what it was. So anyways, I go through the rest of the exam. I go back to this question. I can't figure it out. And it was the written, because the level 3 has got a written component. I had to leave it blank. It made me go crazy, because now obviously if there's marks I need in order to pass, because we don't pass with a 50%, it's the pass mark fluctuates according to how the candidate pool that has written that exam has done. So now I'm a few marks down because there's a question I haven't answered. And so when the results were coming out, I actually took another week's leave from work, because they're coming out on a Thursday, and I didn't want to be in the midst of anybody at that point in time when the results were coming out. I remember I took leave the entire week. So now this is 4 weeks out of work now. And then just wanted to deal with this and just, honor this moment, because it was a lot. It was anxiety inducing. And I remember, because I went to go wait for the results, Clifton Fourth Beach. So we've got a very special relationship with that place in Cape Town. And I sat down, I was waiting for the email. The email never came. So this one came quite late, because I remember the other one came at 2 hours earlier. So this one literally came 5 minutes before 3:00, almost on time. And I was like, no, man, kept on refreshing this thing. Do I have enough internet? But it was just not coming. So when it came, again, it was that congratulations email. Man, I can't describe the feeling of seeing the mountaintop. I had to look at that email a few times just to make sure they sent it to me. They were talking about me. And eventually I called my mom, my family, and everybody. And then I shared the good news with them. And we celebrated. And we've been celebrating ever since. There's a lot of things that I've spoken about, right? And I've gotten to learn as I've gone through this journey of studying and pivoting and all those things. And there's a lot of stories that I eventually got to in that journey to where I am now. But all those stories and all those moments, they were all pivotal to the final thing. So I don't take for granted any of the small moments, any of the the failings, the turns, the twists, all those things, because all of them were actually molding me into somebody who could sit for an exam, or to have the audacity to even want to say, this is something I want. So I don't take it. I think one shouldn't take anything for granted. I didn't create the charters table to talk about charters. I created the table to talk about the people behind these designations, to talk about their lived experiences beyond the letters. And part of the podcast series, we might have a dining experience. We might have a community, like we will come together in communal spaces, and the essence there is to have people that would have never ordinarily met to meet in this space. So that's what we're trying to create here with the charter table. And the people that belong here, it's charter holders, it's candidates, where you could be, people, somebody who's, the trainee accountant trying to become a CA. You could be doing the CFA level 1, 2, 3, or you could be also, with CFA, you also need the work experience. So it could be for you. It's also for hiring managers. Hiring managers could be anyone in HR, somebody who's sitting looking for an analyst or looking for any type of young person to join their team. It's people who are curious about what it takes to achieve these designations. It's also friends of the charter, because there's some people who just will never write the CFA, but they do resonate with the stories and they do resonate with the charters, and they do want to support those people. It could be somebody in high school, a university student who's still trying to figure out what to do for the rest of their lives. So really, this table is for anybody who just has an interest in the world of finance and wants to understand what it takes to get to a certain point and to listen to stories. You don't need a designation to sit at this table. You just need curiosity. Now, every guest who sits at this table, I'm interested in 2 questions from them. 1, what is your why? And 2, do you feel like you are living in your purpose? As you listen to this, I actually want you to think about your answers to these questions, because they become important as we journey through these episodes. And I think here's one more thing. Whilst I've spoken at length about physics, about mechanics and all the failings and all those things, and then eventually spoke about the CFA charter journey, as I was preparing for this episode, one of the things that came to mind was, what is a charter in your language? So if you cannot explain these things to our families, or to umakulu back home, the grandmothers, explain to them that this is what I do, or this is what these designations are. If we cannot describe things in our own language, how do we expect to actually fully grasp and understand what those things are? So that's part of the conversations that we want to have here. In the episodes to come, I'll be sitting down with charter holders. It could be somebody who's on their journey, or somebody who actually decided not to go through with the charter itself, or somebody that even fell off the charter journey. And we will be uncovering their stories. I think my first point of departure is being able to explain things in our language. And with the charters table, I hope that we can start to uncover some of those stories behind the letters, and also tell the stories of the people that lived those journeys. I would like to invite you to join me at the charters table. Thank you. If you have any questions, submit a question via email at info@thecharterstable.co.za. Ndinga, Ntaganding.